So thank you, Mark Zaid, for appearing on Objections. Want to start things off by talking about a recent event. A man who threatened you was recently sentenced to a year in prison. Uh, can you talk about his threat against you? And obviously, that fell in a context where elected officials were vilifying you for representing the whistleblower.
Yeah, so I've been practicing law in the DC area, internationally for almost 30 years. And my entire professional career has been to challenge governmental authority. It doesn't make a difference who's in power, Republican, Democrat, communist, dictator, really no issue. I go after them all. And I've represented over the years senior level officials. I've represented many whistleblowers. And yeah, sure. When the case is politically sensitive, you might get some phone messages, maybe a letter, old fashioned letter, or a postcard, or an email in more modern times. Trump administration was just a world of difference. I mean, everybody who obviously lived through it in so many different avenues of their professional life experienced this. So here it was, we're representing a whistleblower against, I don't even say against, involving allegations with respect to the president of the United States and his conduct, someone who lawfully followed the rules, the process. I came into the case in September, late September of 2019. The case started in August. So I came in 5 weeks into the picture. My colleague, Andrew Buckeye, who's a former whistleblower himself at the CIA and a client of mine and a good friend and law colleague, he started the case. It was under Andrew's tutelage that the whistleblower complaint was filed, not under mine. So all these conspiracy theories right there goes out the window. I didn't conspire with Congressman Adam Schiff to file the whistleblower complaint because I didn't even know anything about the case for 5 more weeks, like when everybody else found out about it. I learned about it maybe a week before everybody else in the public. So when this went public, and that I did do, I was responsible for the case going public, third week or so of September, we started to get nasty messages. And they were particularly what we would expect. And they weren't just harassing, obnoxious. Then, what happened in the first week of November of 2019 changed everything. Some Republican operative found a tweet of mine from back in 2017, which I remember tweeting it. It was like 9 o'clock at night. I'm working at home, which is where I always work anyway, but pre-pandemic, didn't matter. And Sally Yates, the acting attorney general, had been just fired by President Trump for her refusal to implement the executive order on immigration. And Jake Tapper of CNN tweeted it out. I just happened to see his tweet before, I guess, any other news organization or entity. And I retweeted it. And I said something like, I don't know, hashtag coup has begun. I don't know, rule of law, lawyers will prevail. And that was my general theme. Impeachment will follow. And I was referring with respect to the coup. In my mind, I'm thinking, here you have senior government officials standing up to the leader, the boss, declining or refusing to abide by their authority, and they suffered the result, which was properly for Trump to fire her. I actually had no issue with that. But I was talking about senior government officials standing up against the president. Mm-hmm. And I wish I could say I was so prescient to know that I alone knew that President Trump would be impeached. I think anybody who was watching a week into his swearing in knew this guy was going to be impeached, that he was just going to do something that stepped over the line. So I am not politically active. I have not been politically active at all during my political career, my legal career. I have represented Republican members of Congress, Democrat members of Congress, senior officials in the White House of both administrations, more in the Trump administration than ever in any other administration, including up to the National Security Advisor of the United States. So I tweeted it out and I never did anything after that, except I think I responded to some unknown anonymous Twitter person who asked me a question, and I'm like, yeah, don't worry. They were like, will we get him? I'm like, yeah, don't worry. We'll get him, which I was meaning, either he'll get impeached or he'll get voted out. That was it. Never turned to it again. And I think I hashtagged impeachment a few more times. And I started to talk about lawyers rule, lawyers will prevail, the rule of law will prevail, that lawyers will save the day, because everybody standing up to them in the government were lawyers. And not that there was non-lawyers, but the lawyers were the ones taking the steps. So that tweet gets found. I don't go out of my way to delete tweets. I'm one of those guys that I firmly believe I said it, I own it, fine. What do you want to know about it? So I only delete a tweet if I made an error in something. Every once in a while, I retweeted what I thought was a congressman's idiotic tweet, and it turned out to be a parody account. Well, that had nothing to do with what I was trying to do, so I deleted that tweet. But other than that, if I commented on something substantively, and if I understood what was going on, I don't delete what I did. So I kept it. So that gets found, and that just blows up. Everybody seizes on this. So the fact that Andrew had been an intern 20 years earlier for Senator Hillary Clinton and Chuck Schumer, that was no longer a talking point, as if ever it should have been, because that's ridiculous. He was like 19 years old. And now it was this, oh my God, the whistleblower's lawyer said the word coup, as if somehow I was there to overthrow the president of the United States. So the president of the United States himself goes to a speech that night somewhere in, I think, Louisiana, and doesn't mention me by name, but reads from, I think, a Fox News story of this tweet being found. And obviously now the whole Democratic conspiracy, of which I'm a registered independent and always have been, the whole Democratic conspiracy is out there in the open, that this is a total plot and coup to bring him down. Holds up a news article, and you can see a photo, and everybody always says that he held up my photo. For the life of me, I have watched that video so many times, and I'm pretty sure that is not my photo that is in that article, which, hey, that's even better, so that people don't know what I look like, other than when they watch these podcasts now. But he holds that up, and he talks about, I don't know, I'm a scumbag or different things. And then that had an impact, but what really had an impact was Rush Limbaugh naming me specifically for countless times, talking about the tweet. Laura Ingraham on Fox doing the same. Sean Hannity doing the same. Mark Levin on his radio show doing the same. From those four, I think that's four, right? Four individuals mentioning me by name, that's when the hatred and the vitriol started to come in. I had to turn off my office phone line. In fact, I've enjoyed that silence so much I have never turned it back on in 2 years. People know how to find me if they need to. I represent spies. If they can't find me, they don't deserve to be my client. So then, so I had to turn the phone off, because literally some folks were clearly setting up some sort of computer programs to just redial my phone and constantly keep it engaged, and filling up my voicemail with really nasty messages. Some comments about my being Jewish, so you can figure out how anti-Semitic some of the comments could have been, and that's what they were. Some things assuming I'm a Muslim, which I am not. It is not Zaid, it is Zaid, Lithuanian Jew. Not that there's anything wrong with being a Muslim, but I had both the anti-Semites and the anti-Islamic people attacking me. And then just, all sorts of curse words, and, where to put certain things, and, in body parts, things like that. And I received about half a dozen what I considered to be genuine death threats that crossed the line. The first one I remember had nothing but the title in the email, "A bullet in your head." I'm like, okay, well that one's different. And I'm talking to my colleagues. All right, what do you guys think I should do about this? And so we decide we're going to give it into local law enforcement, report it to the FBI, etc. The fellow who you mentioned, who has just now been prosecuted, just been sentenced to a year. He was indicted, made the threat in November of 2019, indicted in February of 2020. Obviously, COVID and all hit. Pled guilty, I think, in December of 2020. Sentenced in June of 2021. He said something like, "I'm going to bleed you like the pig you are. We all walk among you. We know what you look like. We know who you are. You know, you'll never see us coming." Something like that.
Mm.
And each time those came in, I reported them to the FBI. My local law enforcement, technically that's the appropriate venue, but it's not. You know, this was interstate. All these people were, frankly, hundreds, if not thousands of miles from me, fortunately. I don't think there was ever a real threat that manifested that I know of, in the sense of that someone was coming here. But, you know, post Pizzagate, Comet Pizza in Washington, D.C., guy, you know, they thinks there's a pedophile ring in the basement of a pizzeria that has no basement.
Right.
As a building, has no basement. No secret basement. There's just no basement. There's just asphalt,
Right.
concrete.
That was the context. It must have been terrifying.
Can't take a
These
chance.
things could have manifested, right?
You had no idea if anyone would ever come. So the FBI, to its credit, I thank them profusely, because I sue the FBI all the time. I'm constantly suing the FBI. I once tried to subpoena Louis Freeh when he was the director. Couldn't find him. But they took it seriously. They were professional. They investigated. They went out and they met at least, I think, half a dozen folks, which I'm sure basically had them pee in their pants when the FBI shows up on their doorstep saying, "Did you send this email?" I will say most of these folks, how stupid are they? They used their real email addresses. Not just their real email addresses, their name was often in their email address. And like, I would even just Google them and come up with them, you know, what their address was. Unbelievable.
Mm.
So this one most guys, when the Bureau went out to them, you know, like I said, they probably just peed in their pants, or they just went, I was kidding. I was drunk. I'm not going to do it again. And they never did. There weren't any repeat offenders with respect to death threats. There were repeat obnoxious people who constantly emailed me. Still, even 2 years later, I hear from them every so often. I actually got a death threat in June of 2021 from someone who had threatened me in 19. I reported that. We'll see what happens, if anything. So this guy who was prosecuted, he made the unfortunate mistake of reacting physically and verbally to the FBI agents who visited him. And as a result of that conduct, in combination with the threat he had sent to me, is why he was prosecuted. And he had a long history of issues. He's seized with a lot of demons in his life. And you know, on some level, I feel bad for the guy, to be perfectly honest. But on another level, I'm glad that somebody was made an example of. And I hope that this is used elsewhere as a precedent to go after anyone who threatens a public figure, or even a private figure, a public official. I mean, this has become the new normal. And it's sad to say, I'm not going to say there are no people on the left who do this, because there are radicals on the left, and I've confronted them at different times. But I tell you, I don't get death threats from them. I might get hacked every so often, or an attempt from the left, but not anything in the shape of death threats. That for whatever reason, it seems to be the baby of the alt-right, especially accusing one of pedophilia. That is their mantra. Anyone who they don't like gets accused of being a pedophile. And
Was
that's
that
scary. Not because I think, oh my God, someone's going to believe that who knows me, but again, Comet Pizzagate, this idiot who thought there was actually a pedophile ring there, and he comes up with an AR-15 and other weapons to shoot up the place. That's what's concerning.
right? Do you think that these were folks who were subscribers to the QAnon conspiracy theory, uh, or was that more in the Pizzagate era?
Yeah, the Q stuff came later. Now, I can't say that any of the folks who were coming after me were not members of Q or supporters of Q or whatever one wants to style it, but it wasn't discussed at that time as much. And as I think I'm trying to think if you guys have reported on it, but the person who they alleged to have been Q is a client of mine, falsely alleged to, identified to be Q. I mean, now there's news stories out there as to who they actually think is Q. It's not even somebody who lives in the United States. But one of my clients, who was a former senior Trump official, has been accused of being Q behind the scenes. And I'm sorry to say, everybody, he's not.
I remember covering Trump's first impeachment, and one of the striking things, you had the House GOP blowing up enormous placards behind them, and one of them was that tweet, the one that set everybody off. Do you think the House GOP, was anyone aware of the amount of hate and bile you were getting just because of that theory and because of that tweet in question when they blew that up?
Yeah, I think so. And interestingly enough, they didn't even blow up the whole tweet, so it took it totally out of context. The fact that I retweeted a story about Sally Yates was the whole context of what this tweet was about. And all they did was take my tweet. So they manipulated it. And in fact, they manipulated my picture as well, which I didn't catch until later. And it was still my picture, but my profile on Twitter, I think, was and still is an event at the International Spy Museum. So I'm standing in front of a designation of the Spy Museum, and I guess some Republican lawyer didn't want to have a copyright violation. So they took out that image and put a different image that they found of me online. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but it showed that they were manipulating the tweet. Now, interestingly enough, and I've talked about this, but I don't think many people, frankly, know about it. Devin Nunes and I have a history, and it's actually all positive. The chair of the Republican ranking member of the House Select Committee on Intelligence, who has, been so ascribed as being this Trump lapdog, he and I worked very closely together back in 2013 to 2016, quite frankly, but on Benghazi in 2013, 2014, when I represented a number of the CIA employees who were in Benghazi when the ambassador was murdered. Anyone who's read the book 13 Hours or seen the film, those guys were all my clients. And Devin Nunes was a huge, huge supporter. I mean, I consider Devin to be a friend. I haven't talked with him in quite a while. But ironically, while the alt-right was accusing me of conspiring with Adam Schiff, the chairman, the Democrat who's on the House Select Committee, the only member of Congress I was in touch with during impeachment was Devin Nunes. I would text Nunes on his cell phone everything we were doing. I mean, we made it clear that we were not going to favor the Democrats during the impeachment process. Our objective was not impeachment. That had nothing to do with it. It wasn't on our radar. We weren't advocating for it. It was an outgrowth of the fact of the whistleblower complaint. And we made sure that we weren't doing anything to favor the Democrats. So anything we told the Democrats, we told the Republicans. And the difference between the House and the Senate is significant. In the House, the parties really work independently from one another. There's not a lot of overlap, not a lot of joint efforts, especially when it's partisanly contentious. The Senate, not the same. They really do work together. We would talk to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and we would have conference calls with both parties at the same time, staff from both sides. The House, we had to have separate conversations with. So when I would talk to Adam Schiff's staffers, long into the case, we would then call the Republican staffers. And I would always make sure I would tell Devin Nunes in particular what we were doing. And I don't think it is any coincidence that, at least as far as I'm aware, I don't think Congressman Nunes ever once mentioned me by name. A couple of times he referenced a lawyer because he had to. It was the political aspect of what was going on. He couldn't ignore what I got caught up into. So a couple of times he mentioned the lawyer, but others like Congressman Jordan, Gosar, what's her name? Elise
Stefanik.
They mentioned me by name. They went after me. It wasn't like Nunes didn't know my name. I mean, I probably messaged him, the night before the hearing to make sure he knew of something. So I thought that was actually quite respectful. And we were friendly throughout the whole time that this was all taking place. But look, it was already reported that, the threats had come in. So I can't fathom they weren't aware. I tried to get that blow up, that poster board. I tried for like a year to get them to give it to me, but I didn't succeed.
Well, if anyone in the House GOP is listening to this podcast, there is a pending request from Mark Zaid for that placard. So what was going through your mind when you see this? The entire world was watching Trump's first impeachment, and this placard, which was, as you mentioned, very carefully cropped so you don't see what you're quote tweeting, was in prime view of the cameras. Do you remember what was going through your mind when you just first saw this? Your altered tweet behind members of Congress defending the former president?
Yeah, I think the word I would use to describe what I was feeling, and I do remember it, is no doubt a word that has been overused. Maybe not even overused, has been used more often than any other word during a presidential administration. And it was surreal. It's like, what the hell? Are you serious? What? Look, I have testified before Congress a number of times. I have been mentioned in hearings a number of times, but nothing like this. I remember being interviewed prior to this tweet becoming known, and news media were doing profile stories on the lawyers and everybody who was involved with the case, the primary folks, the whistleblowers, to the extent they could find out information. And I was always saying this wasn't new to me. I've had many, many high-profile cases. I am used to dealing with the media. It doesn't faze me in the slightest. I represent a ton of people in the media. I know a lot of people on the Hill, usually in government. I'm used to high stress type of postures and when media is intense, but it's been usually days, 2-3 days maybe, and then the story fades away. During the Trump time, it was so different, right? It was, and you guys in the media were experiencing as well, nonstop, right? 24/7. You had to watch the news every second of the day to see what was being said, what was happening. Did it impact me? Here in the first 6 months, almost 5-6 months of the Biden administration, I'm swamped with work. Whistleblowers, just individuals in the employment of the federal government, contractors, whatever, military who are having issues with their agencies. I'm overwhelmed with work. It's very stressful, but the anxiety is not there. I don't watch the news. I don't have to watch the news. I don't care what's going on. If something significant is going on, I know I will hear about it, and it won't. If I hear about it even 3 3 hours after, I'll still have time to react. The story wouldn't have changed in the 3 hours. Whereas literally, if you didn't respond within milliseconds, the story switched to something else. And so here it is, we're watching in real time these events, where they're talking about our client and we're deciding, do we respond? Do we not respond? Talking about the fact that they're going after me as the lawyer. How do we respond to that? Do we respond to that? And, for the most part, we never did. We just let it go. I mean, there were maybe a day or two of some time of response. We did no television during the entire first impeachment. We mostly tweeted our responses or gave email comments. Every once in a while, I was on the phone with someone to shape the narrative of the story. But we stayed in the background. We never once directly interacted with the president. He tweeted, we ignored. We might have responded in another way to what he was saying. We did respond to certain members of Congress, particularly dealing with the protection and the identity of the whistleblower and whether or not they followed the rules and the process by which they utilized, which was the proper process, the lawful process, and responded to that. And I think I might have responded to the fact that the president said I should be sued for treason, which doesn't exist.
So you were talking about keeping on top of the news. We were chatting not too long ago about Ambassador John Bolton's book and the dropping of the case against him. Want to get your thoughts on kind of reestablishing the rules after they've gone into such upheaval. You talked a little bit earlier about how it's not about politics for you. You've defended people who are Democrats. You've defended people who are Republicans, and you were very critical of John Bolton in the way he went about publishing his book. Can you go into that?
Sure. So one of the things I do in my law practice is represent individuals who have pre-publication review obligations or who had access to classified information, because they aren't necessarily the same. If you have just access to classified information, secret, top secret information, you don't necessarily have a pre-publication review requirement. That is usually associated with what's called SCI, sensitive compartmented information, which you would hear as TSSCI, top secret sensitive compartment information. Everyone pretty much who works in a spy agency or in the White House, for the most part, has TSSCI. And there is a mandatory obligation to submit your writing, unless it's literally a cookbook or gardening. Even speeches, even if you know you're going to be on television and you don't have anything written out, technically speaking, you're supposed to write it out a little bit and give it to the agency that last held your clearance and find out if it's classified or not. Now, that's impossible, frankly, to do from a timing standpoint and a logistical standpoint. But the folks who write books, and I helped H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor under the Trump administration, with his book. I helped this guy, Guy Snodgrass, who was Secretary of Defense Mattis's chief speechwriter. I've done more books, helped out more books than any other lawyer, especially in litigation, dozens of these. I've been recognized as an expert witness by a federal judge in the No Easy Day case, which was the SEAL Team 6 discussion of the killing of Osama bin Laden. And he did not submit the book for pre-pub. He was not my client. He had a lawyer who told him he didn't have to submit it. I was the expert witness for him in a malpractice case against the lawyer. Like, how did you not know to submit this book for pre-publication review? Right. Anyway, Bolton submits his book through his lawyer, which is the first violation. So you are not allowed to have an unauthorized disclosure of information as part of this process. Now, I'm not talking about classified information. A pre-publication review component has two aspects to it. One is you can't disseminate classified information without authorization. Two, you can't submit any information, disseminate anything without giving the government the opportunity to review it to make sure it's not classified. It's a breach of contract. It's a simple contract. It could end up having not one word of classified information, but if you didn't give the government the opportunity to say, no, the book is good, or yes, the book is good, go ahead, then you're in breach of contract. And the precedent, the legal precedent is they can seize your royalties, your advance, maybe the proceeds from speeches and things like that. But without a doubt, the advance that often is paid, and Bolton got like $1 million, $2 million, I think was publicly reported, and then royalties. And there's a former CIA guy, Frank Snepp. His royalties have been seized since 1980, right? 4 decades, the CIA, US government has seized his royalties. So I know, having litigated so many of these cases, that the government doesn't allow me, even as the lawyer who has his own clearance in most of my cases, to have access to the manuscript. So I avoid it. I can still guide a client through the process. Bolton gave the manuscript to his lawyer. He gave the manuscript to his literary agent. He gave the manuscript to the publishers. And, who knows how many people had access to that draft manuscript. He submits it at the end of December, like December 30th, something like that. Last time I checked, every year, that's like 2 days before New Year's Eve. You know who's working in the government at that point? Like no one, all right? So he's like, I want it back in 30 days. I'm like, what world do you live on? Because that is not my world that I live on. I don't even require that, in the best or worst of cases that I expect the US government to be able to respond back over the period of a holiday. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Anyway, so he starts to get incredibly frustrated with the timing, which is normal. And the timing takes too long. And he's dealing with White House officials with the NSC. And he's being basically told, first of all, he was told there's a ton of classified information in your book. And this is overlooked by a lot of people. I'm not talking about when then Michael Ellis and John Eisenberg, the 2 White House lawyers who came into play, they came into it later on in the process, like in March, April, May of whatever year we were talking about, I guess 2020. At first, the career staff said there's a lot of classified information, and Bolton worked with them to revise it. That's normal. That's fine. That's appropriate. Then the political people came into play, and they superseded the careerists and said, nope, there's still classified information, and we're not going to allow you to publish it. Now, the argument, of course, is that these individuals who were diehard partisans, these are the same people who were in every one of my cases involving pretty much the Trump administration inside the White House, that they were acting politically, they were acting to retaliate and punish John Bolton. And you know what? Let's concede that they were. Let's say it. Fine. They are. They did. They were doing it. Whatever. Bolton's option is to sue. Bolton's option is not to decide, well, I disagree with you, or I think you're political and you don't have a basis for this. Bolton's obligation and remedy is to sue. And I would have represented him in a heartbeat in such a case, and we would have won. I don't have any doubt of it. Can't tell you how long it would have taken. Sometimes I finish these cases in literally a week because the case law is strong. The facts are strong. The law is strong. Sometimes it takes years. But instead, he decides on his own because, frankly, I don't know if John Bolton knows who I am, but I've known him for since I was in law school. I first met him. I don't think he would remember me, but I remember him very vividly. I've met him for coffee. I doubt again he remembers me, but he was somebody. I was just a young lawyer, and this is typical John Bolton. And he's got a great career, great experience, but that doesn't mean he knows what he's talking about, and it doesn't, more importantly, give him the authority to say he's right, the government is wrong. So he decided to publish the book instead on his own. Now, through the publisher, obviously, without approval. And that's what led to the lawsuit. Now, bad decisions make for bad policy. And one of the grounds that they went after him for was that he had given the manuscript to his lawyer, to his literary agent, to his publisher. Now, again, that happens all the time. I've had lots of clients who did that. And that is a violation of their contract. I agree. I'm not involved with it, but usually they come to me after they've submitted the manuscript and they've run into problems with the agencies. So it's already gone through this whole process. But the government practice has been, as long as you make the changes ultimately that we say you need to make, and then the book is published, no harm, no foul. All is good. Because realistically, they know most people don't realize they're supposed to give in the manuscript much earlier, or that they'd be going after so many people. So now we have on the books that that was inappropriate, either breach of contract, illegal, whatever you want to say. And regardless of whether it was political on behalf of Eisenberg and Ellis, Bolton still violated his agreement with the breach of contract. And now he's set this precedent that the US government has backed away from someone who has openly violated and breached his security obligation, his non-disclosure obligation. And I don't think that that sends the right message, because I'm all for rule of law and following what the obligations are. And individuals should not decide on their own whether or not something is classified. You know what that leads to? Ed Snowden and others who decide, I'm going to leak this information illegally because I don't think it's classified, or I think it should be revealed to the world. There's no difference between Ed Snowden and John Bolton in that context. And the one final thing I'll say, even if this was political, I will point to the fact that the NSA director, the current Biden NSA director, filed a sworn declaration that the manuscript that was published contains SCI information. And I'm not aware that the current NSA director is considered to be a Trump loyalist, partisan individual. He's a military appointee who has now served both Republican and Democrat administrations. And he says that there was a crime committed by the publication of Bolton's book. So I take real offense that the Biden administration actually dropped this lawsuit. I could understand if they had dropped part of it, aspects of it, because it was going to be really uncomfortable for this White House to defend the other White House as an institutional matter. But the reality is this was an easy open and shut case to win. And at the minimum, I would have expected Bolton to have paid a settlement of like $2 million, forego the advance that he received. And then, bygones be bygones.
Mm. Does the fact that you and your client in the whistleblower case that led to Trump's first impeachment followed everything by the books and had this enormous blowback, and you're doing everything right, you go through the usual channels, does it color your outrage over what Ambassador Bolton did?
It does go to the fact those who have greater power get greater breaks. I mean, that's the reality. Like, I have had individuals prosecuted for leaking classified information, some of which cause no harm other than, by definition, the mere leaking of it on paper causes harm, but no actual harm. Yet General Petraeus, who I think is one of the most experienced military and intelligence CIA directors we've ever had, but he leaked classified information to his mistress, who held a security clearance, but was given code word, apparently, information. And he got a slap on the wrist and a misdemeanor plea agreement with a fine, which I'm sure he paid by giving one speech, maybe two. And any of my clients who are just civil servants, would have gone to jail. So when I see the Bolton case, then, and in fact, let me take one step back because it goes into this other. Hillary Clinton's situation with her emails and the servers. Obviously, as far as I'm concerned, the Republican blew it out of proportion, which, by the way, I represented the RNC, the Republican National Committee, on Hillary Clinton's emails. It's in the New York Times. The RNC authorized me to acknowledge that they were my client in trying to get information about Hillary Clinton and how she was conducting the emails and her servers for her political operational purposes. That's how much of a political person I am, helping both sides. But Hillary Clinton and those around her did violate the law. Now, I'm not saying that means she should have been prosecuted or vilified or anything like that, but on paper, by definition, how she handled it was completely inappropriate. And when that happened and it became known, we used that. We cited to the Clinton principle when we had some Espionage Act cases. And Espionage Act doesn't mean they were a spy. It just means that they mishandled class. There's many aspects of the Espionage Act. One is a spy. Others is to give information classified to a reporter. Other is to just mishandle it, which happens all the time. Some guy takes classified information home, is storing it for whatever reason, for whatever. They're just keeping everything. We don't know why, just they did. And we asserted the Clinton defense because it was in the news at the time, and that impacted prosecutions that we handled. So fast forward when I see now the Bolton principle is, hey, it's okay. He can do what he did and not suffer any consequences. So the next time I have a client that did something similar, I'm going to be raising that, and I'm going to be going after evidence as to why that case was dismissed in order to help a client who might very well have violated the law and maybe should have paid some consequences in the same way that Bolton should have.
One final question to kind of leave you with. There have been some who have argued that the Espionage Act itself could use an update, that it's, early 20th century. And as you said, it runs the gamut. It can go from anything from someone's a spy or to someone's mishandling classified information in a simply mishandling, not leaking, and it can come with very heavy penalties. Do you agree that it could use an update? And if so, how would you like to see it evolve?
So the lawyer in me, in answering your question, taking it literally, could it use an update? Yes, absolutely could use an update. All right, this is a law that was first written in 1917 and has not been amended since the Korean conflict 70 years ago. What does that mean? It refers to national defense information and photographs and pictures. There's no emails, there's no electronic documentation, there's no satellite imagery, none of that existed at the time. So could it use an update? Sure, yes. Do I want it to be amended? I don't want it to be touched. It scares the hell out of me to consider or contemplate that Congress may touch this law and make it worse, right? The law is not oftenly used. I don't know if oftenly is a word. It's not often used. The Obama administration has this distinction of being argued that more individuals were prosecuted under the Espionage Act for leaking classified information to journalists than any administration prior to. Statistically speaking, that's basically true. But having been involved with Espionage Act cases since the mid-90s, I can tell you the only reason why the Obama administration was able to fulfill that distinction, some of which those cases started during the Bush administration, quite frankly, was because technology and evidence allowed it. It wasn't that Obama was so dead set against ensuring that there are no leaks, because I can tell you the Bush administration wanted to do that, the Clinton administration wanted to do that. They always, every one of them wants to do that. But what changed was the prolific use of emails, far more than ever before, between Clinton to Obama. And more precisely, although that was a large factor of it, the technology within the agencies is so easy to trace what individuals do on their computers that, with respect to Reality Winner, even though the Intercept messed up with how they handled her as a source, NSA and the US government would have caught her within days because they knew that 6 copies of the document she leaked was printed in the world. And then they just were able to zero in on who printed it and then check that person's work email and find out that they were I don't know if it was a work or personal email offhand, but then find out that they had communicated with the Intercept. It's 1 + 1 = 2. It just was so easy. And what, if anything, I would like to see, the only thing I would like to see is just split the Espionage Act into 2 parts. One is keep the Espionage Act for spying, and then come up with another name. I just want you to rename the Anti-Leaker Prosecution Act to deal with those who leak classified information. Because some of them kept complaining that I'm not a spy. I'm doing this for the good of the United States. And that may be their mindset, but it doesn't make it any less illegal. But if the Congress moves to modify this law, first of all, I don't think they'd get it right. There's so much partisan bickering and divisiveness between them that they'll just make it worse. And then when any law is changed, that means the next time someone is prosecuted under it, there's all sorts of legal challenges that emerge. Every word that was changed now has to be defined and interpreted by the court to see what the impact would be. It would tie up the system for years and years and years. And that's not going to be the benefit of the defendants. It's not going to be the benefit of the government or the American people. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of criminal referrals every year about the leak of classified information. Just pick up the New York Times every single day, and you will probably read classified information. And every day, an agency makes a referral to the Department of Justice that, on page 2, column 4, line 5, there's classified information. And the Justice Department can never track that, whoever leaked it, because too many people had access. It's not worth it. Everybody publishes the story. It's not worth it. So of all those referrals, literally you can count on like one hand the number of people who go to prosecution. This is not a law that is abused. It is a law that is so seldom used, but just happens to be very loud, much in the same way of how many people die each year in plane crashes? Far less than die on the highway in car crashes. Do you ever read about the people in the car crash? Maybe the local paper, maybe the local metro section says 2 people were killed, but front page when that plane crashed and 100 people died. Are their lives any less? Or no, and airplane travel is still the safest mode of transportation, far better than cars. It just gets the attention. So I hope Congress never touches this law. What I would like to see is to avoid these individuals who leak classified information, who say they do it for the right reasons. What we need to do is strengthen the whistleblower laws so that it encourages these people, like in the Ukrainian intelligence community case, that they go to lawyers who know what we're doing and follow the law the right way and end up with a positive result. And again, the positive result in that case was not Trump's impeachment. It was that the information the client, the whistleblower, wanted to get conveyed to Congress was conveyed, that we protected them from any retaliation at the workplace, and that we kept them, if they wanted, to have their identity anonymous. Those were our 3 objectives. All 3 of them were met. And that's what I want to see for whistleblowers. That's where I want to see Congress try and amend the laws. But don't touch the Espionage Act.
Thank you for your time, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Adam.